Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If. This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku had nature powers. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. In a world of superheroes, supervillains, superpowers, and many other wonders, very little could surprise society anymore. After the first person was born with a quirk, the world changed for the better. More and more people were born with remarkable abilities, most gaining them by the time they turned 4. Some were late bloomers while others never developed a quirk or acquired one through trauma or stress. Eventually, over 80% of the world's population had quirks. With the birth of quirks came the rise of heroes and villains. Being a hero became one of the most coveted professions. Heroes were admired and beloved, and they set the standard for how quirks should be used. While many villains exploited their powers for selfish or destructive ends, the positive influence of heroes outweighed the harm caused by criminals. Heroes came in many types. Daylight heroes worked openly, patrolling their home cities and handling most daytime crimes. Underground heroes operated in secret, often collaborating with police on dangerous investigations such as dismantling drag labs and stopping trafficking rings. Rescue heroes appeared during natural disasters or after large villain attacks, focusing on saving people caught in treacherous situations. Support heroes had quirks or skills that aided others healing, boosting energy support, or creating protective barriers and were invaluable during difficult battles. Analytical heroes were the detective-like investigators, balancing fieldwork with careful evidence gathering and collaboration with law enforcement. For most people, quirks manifested between ages 4 and 5. That early onset caused stress for parents learning to manage superpowered toddlers, but it became the new normal and allowed children to learn control before they became a danger to themselves or others. Certain professions, doctors, police officers, and firefighters were permitted to use their quirks for their jobs, an exception to the rule that only licensed heroes could freely employ theirs. In practice, however, many people bent the rule. Some used their quirks discreetly at home, others used small abilities in public, like telekinesis to reach high shelves or sleep-related powers to calm fussy children. Kids used their quirks constantly as they grew, partly to learn control and partly because they were children. Izuku Midoriya was one of those children, but he was more careful and thoughtful than most. He had been a late bloomer. He was nearly 7 when his quirk finally appeared, an unusual delay outside of stress-induced cases, but when it arrived it was powerful. His quirk was named Nature's Heart. He could control all kinds of plant life. When his quirk doctor examined him, the quirk factor registered among the strongest the doctor had ever seen. It glowed so intensely it nearly overloaded the machine. The doctor believed there was more to Izuku's ability than simple plant manipulation, and that with training and time Izuku might discover its full potential. Before his quirk manifested, Izuku experienced the darker side of his peers. He had been technically quirkless for almost 3 years, and that made him a target. The children around him bullied him, sometimes using their small quirks to torment him. Their powers were not dangerous at that age, but the cruelty wounded him all the same. Even when teachers watched, they often failed to intervene. When his quirk finally appeared, those same children quickly tried to reclaim friendship. Izuku refused. He ignored their attempts, none of them apologized, and that stung even more. His former best friend, Katsuki Bakugo, had been the worst bully, calling him Deku to imply uselessness before Izuku had a quirk. Early on, Izuku could not control his power very well, and flowers constantly sprouted and bloomed around him. That only increased the taunts, with others mocking him for having a girly, or weak, ability. Izuku learned not to show how much their treatment hurt. He had endured so much bullying that he stopped caring outwardly about their opinions. He still felt the sting of betrayal, especially from Katsuki, but he had long since trained himself not to let it show. The combination of his quirk and those experiences shaped Izuku's view of people. He was not completely against humanity, but he was cautious and slow to trust. Aside from his parents, very few people could earn his confidence. The only ones who could get him to like them were those who looked less human, such as people with intense, mutant-like quirks. Despite his dislike of humans, Izuku loved quirks. Ever since he was little, he loved to analyze them. He watched hero battles to dissect abilities, and his parents used to joke that his real quirk was having a supercomputer for a brain. Quirks were where he was sharpest. He had filled multiple notebooks with notes on heroes, villains, and abilities, and he had been doing it so long that his first few notebooks were scribbled in crayon. That habit made it easier for him to ignore bullies. Opening a notebook let him forget anyone else was around, even if Bakugo often set off explosions nearby because of his quirk. People called him a nerd and a stalker because of how in-depth his notes were, and all of it only deepened Izuku's wariness of others. He kept his own quirk secret, letting everyone believe it simply made flowers grow. That privacy let him observe people's true colors. He treated others with indifference until they earned his trust, which was not easy. An explosion echoed through the street as a common villain attack interrupted his walk to school. Izuku took out a notebook and followed at a distance to record more quirk observations. The villain was running toward the train station. Izuku noted that it looked like someone with a gigantification quirk, and that the villain also displayed a mutation alongside the ability to grow. The villain's maximum size seemed limited, about twice as tall as a large bus, making the ability threatening but not on par with those who could reach skyscraper heights. Izuku deliberately labeled it as a less powerful, or smaller version, rather than weaker. He knew the strength of his own quirk and preferred to keep that private from everyone except his parents. Two local heroes were already helping. Death Arms used his strength to catch falling debris before it could harm anyone, and Backdraft, the firefighter hero, manipulated water to form rope-like barriers and keep civilians clear. A third hero appeared and made it clear the other two were waiting to support him. Kamui Woods, whose quirk allowed him to grow and manipulate a wooden body, was better suited to handle the villain. Izuku felt an unexpected fondness for the wooden hero. Kamui listed the villain's crimes as he charged: robbery, illegal quirk use, and endangering civilians, declaring that the villain represented pure evil. Izuku fought the urge to roll his eyes and thought that Woods was being his dramatic self, diving deep into his hero persona, likely to make heavier villains underestimate him and turn the situation in his favor. Kamui leapt onto the roof of the train station and announced his move: preemptive binding, lacquered chain prison. His arm rapidly grew like a tree, accelerating through growth, sprouting many branches that formed a chain-like prison. It was a familiar technique Izuku had seen Kamui use to capture multiple villains or restrain larger opponents. Izuku flipped to Kamui's page in his notebook and updated his observations, noting that although Kamui was a newer hero, his improvement rate outpaced many newcomers during their first year. The chain prison had barely reached halfway when another hero entered the fight. A woman hero declared her arrival as Canyon Cannon and surged into the fray. She had long, creamy blonde hair and wore a distinctive purple and tan hero suit with orange accents and a purple mask. She increased her size dramatically and delivered a powerful kick that struck the villain, sending him stumbling backward. Izuku recorded that she appeared to have a stronger gigantification quirk than the villain's, without any visible mutation. She seemed to have reached her maximum size to make that strike. As he scrawled notes on blank pages, the crowd pressed in around him, and he noticed many of the people closest were men. Canyon Cannon greeted the crowd with a confident smile while keeping the focus on the rescue, and the spectators responded with cheers and applause. And Lady announced that she was MT Lady. Izuku sighed as he watched her showboating. He looked up at Kamui Woods, who appeared almost in shock at what had just happened. Kamui slowly retracted his wooden limbs, reverting them back to arms instead of the chain-like form he had used moments before. He asked incredulously if she had really done that. A sudden voice behind him made Kamui jump. Izuku sat on the edge of the train station roof, vines coiling around his arms where he had used his quirk to climb up. Kamui remarked that Izuku could be very sneaky when he wanted to be. Izuku smirked and noted that, because he preferred to avoid most people, he had become adept at being quiet. Kamui was one of Izuku's favorite heroes. Izuku admired Kamui not only because his quirk was nature-based like his own, but because Kamui had refused to let his wooden mutation stop him from being a good hero. Despite a face mostly hidden by his wooden features and the teasing that must have come with his appearance, Kamui chose to help others. Izuku had seen footage of him charging into burning buildings to help people escape, even at personal risk because of his wooden body. Izuku did not like most humans, but he could respect and like those who proved themselves good people. Kamui asked what Izuku had been saying about Empty Lady. Izuku shrugged and described her as one of those heroes who craved attention, pointing out how obvious her flamboyance was given the crowd of reporters swarming the scene. Kamui conceded that she had gotten the job done, but Izuku countered that it had come at a cost. He explained that Kamui's standard approach would have contained the villain cleanly and without collateral damage, while Empty Lady's flashy kick had sent the villain tumbling into a nearby building and had dented the train tracks with the force of impact. Kamui noted that he understood Izuku's concerns and suggested giving her some leeway since this was her first outing as a full pro hero. Izuku rolled his eyes and admitted that he was an expert at being bitter about people's mistakes. Kamui chuckled and noted that Izuku was also expert at sarcasm and sass. Izuku smirked in return. Kamui teased that if he ever tried to change Izuku, he would have to deal with Izuku's mother. Izuku replied that his father's fire-related quirk might seem intimidating, but Kamui insisted that Izuku's mother was far more fearsome because she could stop making him strawberry rice cakes. Izuku rolled his eyes at Kamui's confession of a sweet tooth. Over time Kamui had become something of a family friend. Their neighborhood lay along Kamui's patrol route, and he had dropped by more often as he grew fond of the family. The family welcomed the friendship because Kamui treated them kindly. He especially enjoyed Izuku's mother Inko's cooking. In his opinion, her fruit-filled rice cakes were the best sweets he had ever tasted. Izuku credited his multitasking skills to his mother's influence. When Kamui offered to help Izuku get to school because the train would take time to repair, Izuku arched an eyebrow and suggested Kamui wanted brownie points with his mother. Kamui did not deny it, praising Inko as a culinary goddess and wondering how she balanced nursing and cooking so well. Izuku allowed Kamui to lift him. Kamui used his quirk to secure an arm around Izuku's waist and carry him toward school. Later, when Kamui set him down, Izuku thanked him. Kamui told him it was no problem and said he would be sure to stop by for dinner in a few days. Izuku laughed and promised to tell his mother how helpful Kamui had been. Kamui swung away with a flourish, and Izuku rolled his eyes fondly at the hero's dramatic exit, the motion reminding him of old comics he liked. Izuku walked the remaining blocks to school. He had asked Kamui not to drop him off directly to avoid attention. He already disliked his school and wanted no extra reasons to draw notice. Aldra Junior High, on its own, was not a bad school. The facilities were good, the lunch staff kind, the janitors thorough, and the equipment up to date. The real problem was the culture among the staff and the students. From the moment he had attended, Izuku had viewed many of them as Quirks who valued power above people. They embraced a might-makes-right mentality that made school a daily struggle for someone who prized decency over dominance. They believed the strong should be at the top while the weak belonged at the bottom. Izuku felt disgusted watching a society that worshipped flashy, heroic quirks and ignored or abused anyone whose quirk was considered weak. The elementary school they had all attended had been run by the same man who perpetuated that attitude, so the favoritism and cruelty had been ingrained for years and only intensified in junior high when physical bullying became more common. Izuku kept up the lie that his quirk only made flowers grow and bloom, which put him among those labeled as weak. He had been a frequent target for bullies, but most lost interest because he never let their words or actions affect him. The constant prejudice hardened him. His dislike of humans grew the longer he lived among people who judged by quirk alone, and that allowed him to simply stop caring about most of the abuse. Bakugo remained one of the worst bullies at school. His quirk produced a nitroglycerin-like sweat he could ignite into powerful explosions, and the teachers and students praised him as the top student who would become the #1 hero, even surpassing All Might. That praise inflated his ego until it became one of his defining traits. As soon as Izuku sat down in class, he felt an irritating presence at his side and fought the urge to sigh as someone approached his desk. Izuku deliberately used the old childhood nickname to annoy Bakugo, greeting him with the familiar name and enjoying the reaction. Bakugo glared and accused him of having his little notebook out again, ordering him to stop writing in it and calling him Deku. Bakugo had never let go of the nickname, At first it had come from a PRD when Izuku had seemed quirkless, and Bakugo continued to use it to belittle him. Izuku ignored the command and told Bakugo that he would ignore his orders instead. Bakugo bristled, his temper as notorious as his ego, and declared that Izuku was just another extra in his path who should do as he said. Izuku replied that Bakugo's view of the world as his own origin story did not obligate him to follow orders, and that unlike everyone else, he refused to cater to Bakugo's ego. Bakugo warned him not to look down on him, his hands sparking with tiny explosions as his quirk manifested in warning bursts. Izuku retorted that he would have to think about Bakugo enough to look down on him. Before the confrontation could escalate further, the teacher entered. Bakugo, cautious about using his quirk in class, stomped to his seat and continued to glare whenever he could. Izuku often imagined how different things might have been if he had remained the shy, meek boy he had been when he believed himself quirkless. At that time he had been SBM's SV and vulnerable. If he had stayed that way he might have become desperate for any good attention and clung to Bakugo, mistaking bullying for friendship because of their shared past. The wider prejudice in their quirkist society had made matters worse for those without powerful quirks. He considered himself lucky for developing a thick skin and learning not to listen to voices filled with hatred. He may have become bitter toward humans, but that bitterness had spared him from sinking into depression under relentless abuse. Izuku understood how awful life could be for the quirkless. He had been in stores with his mother and seen quirkless people charge double simply because they had no quirk. He had witnessed the same discrimination against those with extreme mutations or quirks labeled villainous. The way people were treated in their society depended far too much on abilities or the lack of them. His family had felt the consequences firsthand. His father's job had nearly been transferred to Alaska, which would have forced the family to move if Izuku had remained quirkless because of the financial strain on those connected to quirkless people. His father chose to leave the job instead so the family could stay together. They were fortunate that Izuku's mother, Inko, earned a stable income as a nurse and that Hisashi later found work at a company that made support equipment for heroes. That near loss of his family made Izuku even more bitter toward the prejudiced attitude of their world. By the end of class, Izuku's patience had run thin, especially when the teacher began discussing the school students wanted to attend after the year. Bakugo had already announced his intention to apply to UA, the country's top hero academy, which some claimed was the best in Asia. Bakugo acted as if he were the only student from their school aiming for UA. Then the teacher revealed to the whole class that Izuku also wanted to attend UA. Izuku fought back a glare, feeling the violation. It was against every school's rules to disclose a student's private information without consent. Their teacher had made it clear that Izuku's so-called weak quirk meant nothing to him, but Bakugo did not care for that at all. Bakugo shouted that Izuku thought he could go to UA. Izuku bristled and told Bakugo that he would not let him intimidate him the way he used to. Bakugo insisted that he would be the only one from their pathetic school to attend UA, glaring at Izuku the nature user. Izuku replied that Bakugo did not control the future and that he would choose where to go, and if he passed the entrance exam, that would be his choice. The argument might have continued, Bakugo looking ready to explode at any second, but the teacher had to move on with class. The teachers rarely intervened with the bullies, and Izuku suspected they favored certain students with higher grades while letting the weak fall behind. When the bell rang and everyone else left, an explosive hand slammed onto Izuku's desk as he reached to stand. He rolled his eyes at Bakugo's glare, watched Bakugo's two main lackeys close by, and thought of them as extras rather than friends. Izuku had never bothered to learn their names. They were just two quirkists who treated anyone weaker as dirt. Their quirks, one who could extend his fingers and another who could grow and sharpen his teeth, seemed ill-suited to being heroes, useful for other jobs but not the path Bakugo claimed for himself. Bakugo forced himself into Izuku's face and told him he had some nerve talking back. Izuku said he was trying to teach Bakugo that not everyone would bend to his will. Bakugo snarled that everyone should know he was the future #1 hero and that Izuku had no right to mess with his origin story. Izuku answered that Bakugo's view of the world as his origin story did not obligate anyone else to do as he said. Bakugo growled that Izuku needed to learn his place and insulted Izuku's quirk as pathetic and girly. Bakugo reached for Izuku's notebook, but Izuku clutched it to his. Izuku told Bakugo that taking things that did not belong to him was not heroic and rose to leave. He had no patience for Bakugo's ego-driven tantrums. Bakugo continued, calling Izuku a stalker and a creep for keeping notebooks, but Izuku dismissed the insult as using his brain and walked toward the door, reminding Bakugo that being a hero was not always about strength and that someone would always be more powerful. Izuku knew never to believe anyone was unbeatable. Once an ego was bruised, people fell apart. That was the danger of pride. Bakugo did not like being called out, and he escalated, telling Izuku he would never be a hero and urging him to do something reckless if he truly wanted to be one. Those words made Izuku pause. He had lost so much faith over the years that his old childhood friend still had any kindness left, but the words still stung. He inhaled and held back tears, choosing to walk away without acknowledging Bakugo or his minions. Outside the school, Izuku tried not to dwell on what his former friend had said. His powers sometimes reacted to his emotions, and he could not risk losing control and causing unintended harm. He reminded himself that Bakugo wanted to be a hero at heart, but the teachers around him encouraged toxic behavior. Izuku resolved to be a good hero and hoped Bakugo would learn what that meant. As Izuku entered a small tunnel, a sudden creepy voice greeted him and promised a twisted offer of heroism. He frowned, sensing danger. Slime began seeping from a nearby sewer, a slimy creature forming with eyes and a mouth. The creature taunted him and advanced, clearly intending to harm him. Izuku braced himself and felt his eyes glow green, the sign of his quirk activating. A moment later, a loud voice announced arrival. Izuku recognized All Might, the #1 hero in Japan, and perhaps the world, who had been a hero for over 40 years. All Might declared himself late. Izuku noted that All might be a little late but that he had the situation under control. He patted the giant flower beside him, keeping it closed for the moment as he prepared to confront the slime. Inside the flower was the slime villain who had just attacked him. All Might observed that it was a very interesting quirk. Izuku smirked and told All Might not to underestimate nature. All Might chuckled that he certainly would not. Izuku offered to make the villain more portable. His eyes flashed green as he waved his hand near the flower. The bud shrank until it was the size of a regular fish bowl, still containing the villain. Izuku picked it up and handed it to All Might. All Might expressed relief at seeing the villain captured and, speaking carefully because of Izuku's age, said that the villain had killed many people. Izuku, still disgusted, said the villain had threatened to hurt him. All Might nodded and promised to deliver the villain to the police as quickly as possible. Before All Might left, Izuku flipped to an empty page in his notebook and asked for an autograph. All Might flashed his signature smile and signed the page without hesitation. Izuku thanked him, and All Might said it had been his pleasure before leaving dramatically in a burst of wind. Izuku looked at the autograph and thought All Might was almost as dramatic as Kamui, and that Kaken could learn a thing or two from All Might's attitude. Izuku admired heroes, though his tastes differed from those of the most energetic fans. Satisfied, he continued on his way. Izuku had thought he understood Kaken, but he now realized he did not. He stroked the back of a fox in his lap as he reflected. After leaving school, he went to the small clearing in the forest behind his house where he practiced his quirk. After his father changed jobs, the family had moved to a quieter, more suburban part of Mizudafu, and the clearing had become his daily retreat. Unlike Bakugo, Izuku avoided practicing in public. He preferred privacy to avoid unwanted attention before he even started at a hero school. The clearing had also revealed another side of his quirk. Animals were comfortable around him. He could not speak with them, but injured animals often stayed until he helped them recover. He enjoyed caring for them. They were often better company than most humans. He acknowledged to the fox that Kaken was not entirely to blame, noting the pressures of living in a quirkist society. The fox looked up at him with a sad expression, and Izuku gave a small smile. Several other animals rested or fed in the clearing: rabbits, raccoons, dogs, cats, rats, and deer, along with cranes, woodpeckers, and owls. There were also other foxes, a leopard cat, a brown bear, and a few Japanese wolves, creatures seldom seen and kept private. For now, Predators and prey shared the space peacefully. Izuku wondered if Kaken could redeem himself. Since Kaken was still a teenager, Izuku believed it was possible if he learned the consequences of his actions. The fox cuddled closer as he thought. Izuku's mother called from the house that dinner was ready and asked him to wash up first. He told her he was coming and that he would check on everyone before bed. He set the fox back on the ground and headed inside. Inko asked her son if he had any plans for the day as they sat around the dining table. Izuku explained that he planned to go into the forest to check for injured animals and then test out some new plant hybrids he wanted to try. Hisashi chuckled and ruffled Izuku's hair, remarking that sometimes he could not tell whether his son was a botanist or a mad scientist. Izuku tried to tame his wild hair, asking his father not to mess it up every time. Hisashi smirked and blamed the hair color he had passed on from Izuku's mother, which made Izuku say he liked having his mother's hair color given the nature of his quirk. Izuku then produced a small rose-eyed bloom from the green around his hand and offered it to Inko in thanks. Inko giggled at the gesture and accepted the rose. Inko reassured him that it was no problem. Their family seemed so normal, but in their Quirk society it was not unusual: a fire-breathing husband, a mother who could summon small objects, and a son who could control nature. Hisashi reflected that if this had been the pre-Quirk era, their household would have seemed far stranger, but in their world many families were even more unusual. Izuku asked if his father was working on anything new. Hisashi said they had recently worked with Present Mike, whose speakers needed repair after a battle, and who had requested a support item to help shield allies against his sonic attacks. Inko wondered aloud whether earplugs would suffice. Izuku explained that Quirk-powered abilities like Present Mix went beyond normal sound. He described how Present Mike weaponized sound waves into attacks that could throw opponents and break through obstacles, and how ordinary ear protection would do little against such power. Hisashi interrupted, teasing that Izuku was mumbling again, and Izuku sheepishly rubbed the back of his neck and apologized. Inko told him he did not need to apologize and that they loved how he analyzed quirks, but reminded him to be mindful of those who could not follow him when he mumbled. Hisashi laughed at the idea of taking Izuku to work to watch coworkers react to how smart he was, and Inko playfully told him not to use their son against colleagues. Hisashi dodged the scolding with a comment about some coworkers barely graduating, and mentioned Midnight's support team, Midnight being a notorious pro-hero who still deserved proper support tools. Inko admitted she always thought Midnight's whip looked more for show than function. Izuku shook his head and muttered that it was another reason for him to dislike humans. Inko and Hisashi did not react. They were used to their son's attitude toward humans after how he had been treated before getting his quirk and how their family had sometimes been treated. Hisashi had once considered transferring to the United States because he did not want Inko to be the only breadwinner. After receiving the transfer notice, though, he had spent the day with his family and realized he could not leave them. He left his prior position and took on a role that let him be home while Inko worked more at the hospital. When he later found a job at a support company, the family became happier. Inko did not have to take so many hours, they could afford a better place, and Izuku had a forest as his backyard. Both parents still had to stop their son from bringing every animal he encountered into the house. They loved him, but they did not want the house overrun with wildlife. After they finished eating, Hisashi left for work and Inko cleaned the dishes. Izuku headed toward the forest as he had said he would. Inko called out from the window to tell him to be careful, and Izuku called back that he always would. She also playfully asked him to leave the strays alone, which made him blush as he entered the trees. Izuku remained cautious as he moved through the woods. His quirk helped animals trust him, but they were still wild and could be dangerous when injured. He kept his senses alert. The last thing he needed was to be taken by surprise by an injured animal acting on instinct. After about 10 minutes of walking, he came across a Shiba Inu. The dog's hind leg was trapped in a bear trap and it was clearly hurt. Compassion rose in Izuku as he knelt slowly to get closer without startling the animal. He coaxed the dog to stay calm with gentle movements and grew plants known for their soothing and restorative properties. He wove lamb's ear leaves, goldenrod, and echinacea into a simple dressing to clean and protect the injury and help the bleeding stop. The plant's natural qualities eased the pain and supported the dog while he worked to free it. He carefully dislodged the trap and eased the dog's leg free, then kept the dressing in place until the animal could stand on its own. The dog limped but wagged its tail in thanks before trotting back into the forest, leaving Izuku with a small smile. He continued deeper into the trees to test plant hybrids, mindful of the balance between curiosity and care that his gifts required. Goldenrod was known for its anti-inflammatory qualities, while echinacea helped prevent infection. Izuku had studied many plants after he gained his quirk. He wanted to do more than just learn how to fight with his powers. Nature was such a versatile quirk to have that he could do so much with it. Since he wanted to become a hero, he refused to be a one-trick performer focused only on combat. He wanted to take down villains, rescue people from disasters, heal the injured, and become a symbol of hope for anyone who needed it. When he approached the downed dog, the animal growled, which was not surprising for a creature both injured and trapped. Izuku soothed the dog, assuring it that he would not hurt it and that he wanted to help. The dog kept growling, and because Izuku did not know how long it had been there, he did not want to delay treatment. He took a small plastic bag from his pocket filled with red powder, pinched a handful, and blew it toward the dog. After a couple of minutes, the animal fell asleep. The bag had been filled with poppy pollen, which Izuku used as a sleep aid for frightened animals he needed to treat safely. He moved quickly. Vines and roots responded to his command like gentle, strong hands, and pried open the bear trap with carefully controlled force, freeing the animal without further harm. He applied goldenrod and echinacea to the wound to reduce inflammation and prevent infection, then used lamb's ear leaves as a soft dressing and secured them with flower stems. He picked the dog up extremely gently and ran through the woods as fast as he could. Since his family had moved to their new house, Izuku had spent a lot of time in the forest and knew there were buildings on the other side. This suburban area did not have the density of the main city, but there were still businesses, including an animal shelter that took in injured pets during emergencies. When the buildings came into view, he went straight to the shelter and began pounding on the back door. The door opened to a familiar face. Koji Koda, usually called Koda, stood in the doorway. He was a very shy boy the same age as Izuku. Normally he avoided much verbal interaction and relied on sign language, though he spoke when comfortable. He was notable for a rock-like body mutation, but his quirk, Ani voice, was the ability to communicate with animals, which made him a constant volunteer at the shelter. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief at seeing him and told Koda that he needed help. Koda immediately noticed the dog in Izuku's arms and stepped aside to let him enter. He signed to ask what had happened, and Izuku explained that he had found the dog in his forest, caught in a bear trap. Koda's gentle nature could not hide his anger at the news. Izuku said he would have to sweep the forest for any other traps. They placed the dog on the treatment table. Koda fetched proper bandages and medicine while Izuku took apart the makeshift plant dressings. When Koda returned, he signed to ask what Izuku had used. Izuku explained that he had used lamb's ear leaves to help stop the bleeding, goldenrod to limit inflammation, echinacea to prevent infection, and poppy pollen to keep the dog calm enough to treat. Koda nodded, prepared the appropriate medicinal paste, and wrapped gauze around the leg wound. Koda signed to ask whether Izuku knew why a regular dog would be in the forest. Izuku said he had not seen a collar but that the dog did not appear especially dirty, so it was unlikely to be a stray. He guessed the dog might have slipped out of its owner's house before the collar was put on or squeezed through a gap in a fence. Koda accepted the theory and signed that he would tell his boss so they could make posters later to help reunite the dog with its owner. After Koda finished storing the supplies, Izuku pulled up a stool and sat beside the dog, gently petting it while the pollen kept it asleep. Normally poppy pollen was not powerful enough to produce such a deep sleep, but Izuku's quirk gave him precise control over nature, allowing him to strengthen the effect when necessary. Petting the sleeping dog, Izuku muttered that this incident only added to his growing dislike of people who harmed animals. Koda hummed softly in response. Izuku admitted that he understood hunting for food in certain circumstances, but that hunting for sport or entertainment was disgusting to him. He reflected that animal lives mattered as much as human lives and that setting traps like this was barbaric. Koda signed that the person who had set the bear trap would be guilty of animal abuse, and the two of them prepared to notify the authorities and care for the dog until its owner could be found. Izuku considered the legal implications of the trap in the woods, noting that it could be counted as reckless endangerment given its proximity to a residential area and might also qualify as illegal hunting. He then smiled and remarked that he sometimes forgot Koda wanted to be a hero too, complimenting Koda on his impressive knowledge of the law. Koda blushed at the compliment. The shy teenager was easily embarrassed, but Izuku recognized Koda's desire to be a hero. Izuku thought Koda's Ani voice quirk would be ideal for rescue work, using animals to locate people after disasters or to find the missing, such as a child lost in the forest during a camping trip. Koda signed that humans were better than Izuku thought they were. Izuku responded that he would like to believe that but had seen the darker side of people, villains, hunters, and those who abused others, and that he planned to be a hero for the ones who deserved hope the most, those ignored and abused with no one to look up to. Koda signed that Izuku would make a great hero. Because names did not always translate into sign language, Koda often used nicknames. He typically referred to Izuku as Green, a nickname Izuku liked. Izuku returned the sentiment, telling Koda he would make a great hero as well. Unbeknownst to the two teens, Principal Nezu had been listening. He frequently checked on animal shelters and, as far as he knew the only animal with a quirk, felt a strong need to ensure animals were treated well after his own traumatic past as an experimental subject. That made him wary of human behavior and vigilant about abuses. Hearing Izuku's criticism of humans and Koda's perspective piqued his curiosity, and he stayed to watch and listen, easily following Koda's sign language. After their conversation ended, Nezu used the shelter's security footage and facial recognition to learn who the teens were. Since both appeared intent on attending UA after middle school, the identification was straightforward. A mischievous smirk formed on his animal-like face as he studied Izuku on the screen, and he murmured to himself that Izuku Midoriya was an intriguing person. Later, among the family's living room warmth, Hisashi joked to his son that he had heard about crazy cat ladies but that Izuku's mother was the first crazy dog lady he had met. Izuku laughed. He recalled that the apartment they had lived in before moving had prohibited pets, and he suggested that his mother was probably making up for lost time. Hisashi playfully pleaded with Izuku not to adopt every animal he saw, admitting he loved dogs but did not want to find himself covered in fur after a mutt slept on him all night. Inko defended the dog, saying Kyo just wanted to spend time with his new dad. Hisashi remarked that Kyo was their first grandchild in spirit, and Inko agreed, doting on the dog as she continued to give belly rubs. Hisashi reminded Izuku that he had brought the dog home. Izuku insisted Kyo was a purebred, and Hisashi ruffled his son's hair, teasing that he was continuing a family tradition. Izuku grumbled about his unruly hair, and Hisashi laughed and ruffled it again, prompting a playful, kitten-like slap from Izuku. Kyo had been the dog Izuku rescued from a trap. After bringing the animal to the shelter and getting Koda's help, Kyo recovered quickly. It turned out the dog had been recently abandoned when its previous family moved and left it behind, which explained why the dog looked mostly fine aside from the injury from the trap. Izuku had stayed with the dog through recovery, and after discussing it with his parents they decided to bring Kyo into the family. Inko, especially, was rarely away from the dog, and even Hisashi, despite joking about the hair, loved their new family pet. Seeing his mother cuddling Kyo inspired Izuku to tease his father, and he suggested that Hisashi was probably just jealous that Inko was giving the dog more attention. Hisashi turned an embarrassed shade of red at the tease. A faint flush crept up Hisashi's face, a side effect of his fire-breathing quirk whenever he felt embarrassed. He remarked that Izuku was the only kid who was not embarrassed at the thought of his parents having romantic moments. Izuku replied that if it were a thing, his parents would have been voted the most adorable married couple in Japan, and added that he was too used to how they acted to be affected. Hisashi then called him over, grabbed his son, pulled him into a friendly headlock, and gave him a fatherly noogie. Inko laughed at the antics. Izuku smirked in the headlock and teased that he was, of course, their son, specifying that he belonged to his mother rather than his father. Hisashi protested and delivered another noogie, which made Inko laugh. Even more. Inko told Hisashi to let the boy go, and after a final noogie he released Izuku, insisting that he could torment his son as much as he wanted. Izuku pointed out that he had been let go only because his mother told his father to stop, and joked that his mother had him thoroughly persuaded. Inko laughed at her husband's expression. Their playful exchange gave way as Inko collected herself and asked for a favor. She explained that she wanted to make stir-fry for dinner but had no time to get vegetables from the store and asked if Izuku could grow some. Izuku cheerfully agreed and asked what she wanted. Inko listed cabbage, shiitake mushrooms, green onions, carrots, and snap peas. Izuku gave his mother a thumbs up and headed out. He went to the small woods behind their house, preferring not to use his quirk in public even though few people actually cared about such matters. He remained cautious to avoid anything that might jeopardize his chances of getting into hero school. He moved to the smaller area beside the clearing where he tended to the animals and grew extra produce so the local wildlife could share any leftovers. Leaning down, he held his hands toward the ground and activated his quirk. His eyes glowed green and plants burst upward, sprouting the exact vegetables his mother had requested. The growth was rapid, courtesy of his power. When he was finished, he gathered a head of cabbage, several shiitake mushrooms, a few carrots, some green onions, and a small pile of snap peas. He felt glad to help. His mother worked hard as a nurse and often came home late, which meant she sometimes forgot to shop. His father went when he could, but he rarely used a grocery list and often forgot things. As he picked up the last of the vegetables, his nature sense told him someone had approached. Since neither of his parents would sneak up on him without calling first, it was not someone he knew. Keeping the produce steady, he turned and let vines spring from the ground to gently wrap around the newcomer and pull them closer. He nearly fainted when he saw who he had captured. Principal Nezu stood there, smiling in his usual composed way. He spoke playfully about his identity, asking in jest whether he was a dog, a mouse, or a bear, and then implied that the label did not matter. Izuku recognized him immediately and felt a rush of admiration. Nezu was the only known animal with a quirk and the principal of the most famous hero school in Asia. He had long admired Nezu's environmental work, the charities he supported, and the way he championed those who were marginalized because of their quirks. Between Nezu, Gang Orca, and Selkie, Nezu had been part of a movement to protect the oceans and animals. Izuku expressed that it was hard not to know about Nezu given his status and contributions. Nezu chuckled and acknowledged the point. When Nezu called him by his family name, Izuku realized the principal knew who he was. He asked why Nezu knew his name, and he did not press the question of how, doubting that Nezu would reveal his methods. Even in interviews and press conferences, Nezu only gave vague hints about how he could take down villains with the power of his mind. He hummed and grinned, explaining that Izuku had asked why he knew his name rather than how, and that he had expected Izuku would be interesting. Izuku pressed for an answer as his eyes glowed and the vines he controlled tightened around Nezu. He did not release the hero principle until he had the information he wanted. Nezu admitted that it had been an accident. He checked in on animal shelters and animal hospitals across Japan and could not help himself. He explained that he had been watching the security cameras at Izuku's local animal shelter the day Izuku brought in the dog that would become his. Izuku commented that the behavior felt creepy, and Nezu shrugged without regret, saying he had no ill intent and had only been checking on the animals. He added that he had been intrigued when he overheard what Izuku had been saying to his friend Koda. Izuku, unashamed of his dislike of humans, did not apologize. He had never hidden that he distrusted many people. Looking at the principal, he released Nezu from the vines and retracted them. Izuku suggested they discuss the matter with his parents, and Nezu nodded. The two of them headed to the Midoriya house. At the house, Inko crossed her arms and accused Nezu of secretly watching and researching their son. Though not tall, Inko's protective stance made her imposing, and she spoke like a mother bear standing up for her cub. Nezu responded that he had not meant to eavesdrop. He had simply been checking on the shelter and had been lucky enough to overhear Izuku. Hisashi, also protective, asked if the visit was about Izuku's distaste for humans. Nezu smiled and assured them that it was not a problem. If anything, he understood it. He explained that, out of all the heroes in Japan, he most understood Izuku's distrust. He acknowledged his own difficulty trusting others and emphasized that he took security at UA very seriously. Hisashi asked why Nezu had come. Nezu replied that Izuku was interesting. After hearing the conversation in the shelter, Nezu had looked up Izuku's quirk registration as an applicant to UA and found the nature quirk fascinating. He noted that nature quirks were rare and that one as powerful as Izuku's was even rarer. Inko explained that the family had tried to keep the full nature of Izuku's quirk private, given how poorly he had been treated when he had been quirkless. Hisashi added that when Izuku's quirk did manifest, they felt that no one deserved to know its true extent. Izuku stated plainly that anyone who chose to be quirkist did not matter to him. Nezu said he had been intrigued enough to look deeper. He mentioned that he had recently succeeded in lifting restrictions at UA that had prevented quirkless children from attending, and that the move had been controversial with the UA Board of Directors and the Hero Public Safety Commission. He emphasized that his actions had been for the benefit of those who face discrimination, and that he had zero tolerance for bullying, discrimination, and harassment. He promised that any student who sought help from him would receive it, even if they were not yet students. Inko observed that it made sense why Nezu was Izuku's favorite hero. Izuku protested at being embarrassed, and Hisashi teased him about once begging for a Nezu plushie in a store. Izuku covered his face to hide his blush while Nezu chuckled and watched the family's interaction. Nezu reflected that seeing caring families warmed him, and he had seen many during parent-teacher conference week at UA. Nezu reassured Izuku and his parents that he took his responsibilities seriously and had no intention of causing harm. Izuku, modestly, insisted that not being a daylight hero did not make Nezu's work any less important. Izuku compared it to saying Sir Night Eye was not a good hero just because he stepped away from the spotlight after he was no longer All Might's sidekick, and to saying the Wild Pussycats were not good heroes just because they were a rescue team rather than a team that fought villains. He added that all types of heroes were important. Hearing that, Nezu smiled once again. Nezu explained that he was very happy to hear Izuku say that, and that, after looking into Izuku following his interesting conversation with young Koda, he had grown very interested. Inko and Hisashi exchanged a look. As protective parents, both appeared ready to defend their son even if it meant confronting a hero. Hisashi normally used his fire breath only for welding support items at work, but he knew he could have been a hero if he had chosen to, and he was prepared to step in if necessary. Inko's hand twitched as she fought the urge to use her quirk to bring a knife to her hand. Nezu then bluntly stated that he wanted to make Izuku his personal student. The three Midoriya's faces registered complete shock. None of them had expected an offer like that. Izuku looked on the verge of fainting or bursting into another round of agitated muttering from the shock. Izuku could only manage a single stunned word in response. Nezu repeated that he wanted Izuku as his personal student and explained his reasons. From what he had seen that day and what he had researched, Nezu believed Izuku had an incredible mind. He wanted to help nurture Izuku's analytical skills while also preparing him for UA. Nezu noted Izuku's uncommon critical thinking, a trait few heroes outside of other analysis specialists possessed. Izuku wanted to be known for more than just a powerful quirk and wished to do more than fight villains. Nezu admitted he had never made such an offer before, but Izuku had intrigued him. Izuku looked to his parents for guidance. Inko told him it was his choice and reminded him he had wanted to be a hero since he understood what a hero was. Hisashi added that no matter what he decided, they would support him. Izuku thought it over for a few minutes, weighing the significance of the opportunity. Eventually, he looked back at Nezu and gave his answer. Out of everything Izuku had imagined he might do with his life, visiting the best hero school in the country before becoming a student there had not been one of them. Yet here he stood with the front entrance of UA right in front of him, unsure whether he was about to explode with excitement or faint from shock. It had only been a week since he had agreed to become Nezu's personal student. The idea that his favorite hero would be his mentor still felt unbelievable. His parents teased him about being a Nezu fan, but admiration for the animal-like principle felt natural given Izuku's preference for nature and animals over people. His mother had dropped him off at the gate and told him to call when his lesson was done so she could pick him up. They had no set time because neither knew how long the lessons would last, everything was new, and they were taking it one day at a time. As Izuku approached the school, he could not help but marvel at the building. The main UA building resembled two huge mini skyscrapers with walls of floor-to-ceiling windows connected by glass-like walkway bridges. If he did not know better, he would have thought the entire structure was glass. With someone as clever as Nezu in charge, however, he knew the windows were for appearance. The interior contained all the reinforced structures needed to handle the wide range of quirks that passed through the doors. Izuku guessed the very large doors were meant for students whose quirks made them exceptionally tall. He knew UA had many facilities beyond the main building, simulated cities for training, a stadium for the sports festival, off-campus areas for intense exercises, and numerous gyms for student use. Nezu certainly did not hold back when it came to providing the best for his students. After entering the school, Izuku did not expect to encounter a hero so soon. Although he knew the staff were heroes, running into one right at the entrance still surprised him. The cowboy-themed hero Snipe greeted him and noted that Izuku looked a little young to be around the school. Snipe asked if Izuku was a sibling of one of the students. Izuku shook his head and tried hard not to ask for an autograph. Despite his reservations about people in general, he was still a hero fan at heart. He introduced himself as Izuku Midoriya and explained that he had an appointment with Principal Nezu. Snipe did not show any obvious surprise. Izuku had never understood why the hero wore a gas mask when it seemed unrelated to his quirk, but he accepted that everyone had their reasons. Snipe observed that Nezu had not told any of the staff about meeting someone and that this was likely because the matter had nothing to do with UA. Snipe reassured Izuku that most of them had given up trying to understand Nezu's thought process long ago and would not question his presence if Nezu was involved. Izuku asked if he would be hearing similar comments about Nezu often. Snipe only shrugged and said they all respected Nezu as a friend and colleague while admitting that Nezu could be extremely confusing. Izuku said he would keep that in mind. Snipe then offered to take him to Nezu's office. Snipe offers to give directions. Izuku explains that it would be better if Snipe took him because wandering around UA alone would likely draw questions from other hero teachers, and he would rather not be late. Snipe praises Izuku's common sense and gestures for him to follow. The teen falls into step beside the hero as they walk through the halls toward the principal's office. Izuku asks Mr. Snipe if he may pose some questions so their walk does not remain silent. Snipe replies that questions are fine as long as they do not concern UA's entrance exam or similar matters. Izuku declines any intent to ask about the exam and says he believes getting into UA should come from his actions, not from inside information. Snipe admits he would not have expected such an answer from a UA hopeful. Izuku admits he is not an average teenager and explains that many of his peers would jump at the chance to acquire inside information. He says those people lack faith in their own abilities and can often talk a big game without the skill to back it up. Snipe repeats his compliment about Izuku having a good head on his shoulders and asks what questions he has. Izuku produces his notebook and mentions that he has been analyzing heroes who work at UA, including Snipe, Present Mike, Midnight, Lunch Rush, Recovery Girl, and Principal Nezu. He asks whether people are wrong to assume Snipe's quirk only works with bullets because he uses guns, and whether the quirk can affect anything he throws or launches so long as it originates from him, with the object retaining the original force used to launch it, which is why Snipe uses firearms. Snipe's eyes widen behind his mask at Izuku's analysis. Izuku notes that people often think he has an analysis or intelligence quirk until they see him working with plants. Snipe observes that Izuku's line of thinking is exactly what caught Nezu's attention, and he acknowledges that even some co-workers do not understand that aspect of his quirk. Izuku confesses to being a quirk enthusiast who has analyzed quirks as soon as he could understand them. He takes rapid notes while Snipe's reactions confirm the correctness of his reasoning. Snipe confirms that his quirk allows him to send any object at a target regardless of how it leaves him, but the object retains the same speed it had when launched, which is why he uses guns to achieve destructive force rather than merely cause bruises. Izuku mutters further ideas about how Snipe could use heavier objects or exploit gravity to increase impact, suggesting inspiration from pre-Quirk era athletics like discus, hammer throw, javelin, shot put, and archery to diversify attacks without relying solely on bullets. He acknowledges that such tactics might not match Snipe's cowboy image, but frames the suggestions as tactical possibilities. Snipe raises his hands to stop Izuku and remarks that it is a lot of information at once, praising the teen's intelligence. Izuku admits he tends to monologue when analyzing and jokes that even his parents cannot keep up, noting his father enjoys demonstrating to cocky coworkers that a clever kid can be humbling. Snipe laughs and says he understands why Nezu became interested in Izuku, pointing out how rare it is for someone to keep pace with the principal's thinking unless they possess an intelligence quirk. Izuku reflects that many quirks are specific in scope, offering the example of intelligence quirks that might make someone a math genius but not affect other faculties. He suggests Nezu may be unique in having an intelligence quirk that works across the whole brain. Snipe agrees and remarks that despite his years as a hero, he has never met another quirk like Nezu's. Izuku notes the difficulty of cataloging all quirks worldwide and speculates that if such a catalog exists, Nezu would be the likely creator. Snipe chuckles at the thought and wonders about its legality. They arrive at a door with a Principal Nezu nameplate. Izuku says this is his stop and thanks Mr. Snipe for the company. Snipe wishes him luck and jokes that dealing with Nezu requires it for the sake of one's sanity, then shakes Izuku's hand and walks away. Izuku breathes deeply, raises his hand, and knocks on the door. Nezu cheerfully invites him in. Izuku opens the door and enters the office, noting that he had expected something more eccentric from the principal. The office is simple, dominated by a large desk with a computer and a dark blue leather rolling chair, with couches and a coffee table arranged for guests. Izuku tells Principal Nezu that he will be honest and prepares to explain himself. Izuku had been expecting something grander. Nezu chuckled and explained that Izuku was not the first person to react that way to his office. The principal said he saw little use for useless decorations that served no real purpose and that, although proud of his accomplishments, he was not a bragging person and therefore did not advertise them. Nezu told Izuku there was no need to call him principal and that, as his student, he could call him Nezu-sensei. Izuku agreed and used the honorific. He understood the logic behind the sparse office. With Nezu's quirk, discretion and practicality made sense. Nezu rose from his chair and moved closer to his student. When the principal stood, his short stature caused him to disappear behind the desk briefly, which made Izuku fight the urge to laugh out of respect for the animal-like hero. Nezu walked to one of the couches and gestured for Izuku to sit on the opposite one, and the teen complied. Nezu reminded Izuku that they had a lot to cover. Izuku corrected him that he could be called by his given name and noted that Mr. Midoriya was his father. Izuku also mentioned that, although he was Nezu's student, he was not yet a UA student. Nezu chuckled and said not yet, expressing confidence that Izuku would be ready by the entrance exam. Izuku replied that with Nezu as a mentor he had no doubt. Nezu hoped that Izuku meant he wanted to learn rather than seeking insider knowledge, then produced a cup of tea and took a sip. Izuku admitted he did not know where the tea had come from but was not going to question it. He told Nezu that he wanted to get into UA on his skills, not by using any unfair advantage. Izuku said anyone who tried to cheat their way in was either a coward or lazy, and that he would not disappoint his parents, his mother a nurse and his father a support engineer, by taking the easy path. Nezu said those values were exactly why he wanted Izuku as his student, noting that Izuku was not an average teenager. Izuku sighed at that and reflected that he sometimes acted his age, especially when meeting his favorite heroes, but he also acknowledged that he had grown up quickly. He told Nezu that his quirk did not manifest until he was 7, information Nezu had already seen in his quirk registration. Nezu nodded and observed that his best guess was that Izuku had not been treated well during those quirkless years. Izuku confirmed that not treated very well was an understatement. As an animal with a quirk, Nezu knew what it meant to be different, and Izuku explained that being quirkless had been a social death sentence in their world. During the 3 years before his quirk appeared, he had been bullied relentlessly while teachers looked the other way, and even after his quirk manifested, he and his parents kept its full power secret because of how others reacted. Given how he was still treated for having a so-called weak quirk, Izuku believed that had been the right choice. Nezu asked what made him think it was the right choice, pointing out that Izuku's own words suggested he might be treated better by showing his strength. Izuku replied that such acceptance would not be real. He said his supposed friends had turned on him when they thought he lacked a powerful quirk, teachers saw him only as a punching bag, and a might makes right mentality dominated how people were treated. Izuku argued that no one should be valued solely on the power they possess, and that showing off his quirk to be treated better would only make him part of the problem. Nezu set down his teacup and let Izuku's words sink in. He said it was very rare to find someone like Izuku, someone who recognized the damage done by relying so heavily on quirks. Nezu spoke from experience about how hard it was to find a place in the world when different between his size, his origins as an animal, and his imperfect grasp of human nature. He had been looked down on for a long time. He called it a true miracle that he had reached his position and said that, as an educator, he was in the best place to help teach the next generation. Izuku guessed that Nezu wanted to help change the world. Nezu replied that it was impossible to truly change the world but that they could leave it better than they found it, acknowledging that some would always fight against genuine change. He noted that even after 200 years there were still those who viewed quirks as a sickness that needed to be cured. Izuku forced himself not to cringe at that, remembering the history of organizations from the dark age of quirks that sought such a cure. He told Nezu about his dislike of humans when they behaved in ways that reinforced the harmful hierarchy of strength. Izuku said his school was practically a breeding ground for the belief that only the strong were worth anything, and he was alarmed that some adults and teachers taught children that mindset. He worried how many of those students might become villains, convinced they had the right to harm those they perceived as weaker. Izuku asserted that his school was unlikely to be the only one with that problem. Nezu could not deny that Izuku was right. He had seen many students enter UA with that type of thinking. They were usually the ones who desperately needed Eraserhead's expulsion technique to kickstart their lessons on how wrong that attitude was. He could not deny how many of them ended up either permanently reassigned to general education or completely expelled from UA because they refused to learn. He made sure to keep an eye and an ear out in case any of them tried to enter a lesser-known hero school so they could become toxic influences. Nezu told Izuku that from the moment he had seen him on the security camera, he had known Izuku had a bright future ahead. Nezu explained that, despite Izuku's dislike of humans, Izuku still wanted to make a better future for everyone. Nezu acknowledged that Izuku had been tormented for years and was still treated horribly. With a quirk as powerful as Izuku's, Nezu said he could understand if Izuku had turned toward the villain side, but he admired the good heart Izuku showed at such a young age. Izuku felt his heart race at the praise from the hero he had looked up to his entire life. He understood that his distaste for people could hold him back from his dream of being a hero, so hearing Nezu recognize his good heart meant more than anything. Izuku promised to do his best to make Principal Nezu proud, and Nezu promised in return that he would help Izuku become the best hero he wished to be. Izuku then asked what they should start with. Nezu suggested they begin by coming up with a variety of punishments for one of his hero homeroom teachers, and he looked unusually pleased at the thought. Izuku raised an eyebrow and noted that this was certainly different from what he had expected for a first lesson. Nezu rose from the couch, took his tea, and walked back to his desk with Izuku following. Nezu explained that he gave a lot of power to his teachers and let them teach as they saw fit, including allowing one homeroom teacher to expel students when he deemed it necessary. Nezu admitted that most of that teacher's expulsions were what he called logical ruses. He would expel a student but then inform them after a day or so that it had not been real. He used the tactic to wake up arrogant, lazy, or cocky students, forcing them to either shape up or accept that they did not truly want to become heroes. For many students, Nezu said, it worked. It gave them the push they needed or clarified their true desires. Izuku moved closer to Nezu's desk and asked what made this time different. Nezu sighed and conceded he had been too lenient with that teacher. This time the teacher had expelled his entire homeroom on the first day and had not brought any of them back yet. There was a black mark on all their records, and Nezu had a lot of work ahead to restore their status, since the marks could seriously affect their futures. He began typing quickly on his computer. Izuku took out an empty notebook and said he would make a list of potential punishments. Nezu chuckled. He already knew why he liked Izuku. Nezu told Izuku that he understood better than most the power a place like UA held, and Izuku agreed. The two walked through woods near Yue because Nezu wanted a better sense of Izuku's quirk, and the woods would be the best place for that. Nezu noted that nature-based quirks were rare. Izuku asked whether Nezu meant that in a general sense or in terms of quirks as powerful as his. Nezu replied that he meant a bit of both. Among registered quirks, not many involved nature, and those that did were far less powerful than Izuku's. Izuku acknowledged that a quirk as powerful as his had to be rare, not just among nature quirks but among quirks in general. Nezu added that while quirks might evolve with each generation, some became more specialized rather than simply stronger. He gave the example of a student in the business course whose parents had also attended UA. The father had a quirk like a walking Wi-Fi signal and the mother could control small pieces of technology she had created. Their son's quirk, Nezu explained, was not a full technopathy but instead allowed him to boost the power of any piece of technology he was holding. Izuku remembered reading about the quirk singularity theory. Izuku explained the theory that each generation of quirks would grow stronger until they became too powerful even for those born with them. Nezu guessed from Izuku's tone that he did not believe in that theory. Izuku stated that he did not. He argued that quirks were part of human evolution and that the earliest generations had struggled because their bodies were not yet adapted. He described people burned by fire powers, blinded by light powers, given frostbite by ice powers, and injured by their own strength, and said that, over generations, both people and quirks had evolved together. Scientifically, he believed as long as humans continued to evolve alongside quirks, quirks could not outpace human capacity to handle them. Nezu nodded and complimented Izuku's reasoning, saying he could not have put it better himself. Izuku added that if quirks ever did become too powerful, evolution would work to reverse the change, making quirks less powerful before removing them entirely. Nezu repeated the idea back, framing it as Izuku's theory that evolution would diminish quirk's strength if necessary. Izuku confirmed this, addressing Nezu respectfully as his teacher. Nezu praised Izuku's intriguing mind. Izuku shrugged and said that his mother had always insisted he was smart, telling a story about how she read him medical books from her time in medical school because ordinary stories bored him. Nezu chuckled and observed that Izuku had begun his academic path early. Izuku explained that despite having a powerful quirk, he had to study a great deal to use it properly. He reflected that nature was beautiful but dangerous, noting that poisonous plants could be as deadly as anything created by science because people tended to underestimate nature. They focused on pretty flowers and forgot about the thorns. Nezu agreed and related that he had often felt the same about the students who came through the halls of the academy. People focused on those with flashy quirks and ignored the hard work required to master abilities. Izuku said changing the focus on quirks was one of his goals as a hero. He wanted society to care about the people who had quirks, not just the quirks themselves, and to offer better treatment to the quirkless and those whose abilities had been labeled dangerous. Nezu, curious, asked Izuku to elaborate. Izuku described how students with strong, flashy quirks were pushed into heroics from a young age, told so often that they would become great heroes that they rarely had the chance to choose their own paths. Nezu noted that, for someone who claimed not to like humans, Izuku showed a surprising level of sympathy for them. Izuku sighed and admitted he did not like humans, calling them barbaric, selfish, egotistical, polluting, and hypocritical. He said they relied too much on quirks and divided people based on those abilities or the lack of them. His aim was to make them less horrible. Nezu sighed upon hearing this. It had been clear from their first conversation that Izuku's bitterness stemmed from how he had been treated when he had been quirkless, and that the anger and distrust he carried had grown with other painful experiences. Nezu acknowledged that he himself had felt similar emotions at times and could understand why Izuku struggled to move past them. Even with time, Recovery Girl had warned that certain kinds of trauma never fully disappeared. Nezu decided it was best to move the conversation forward. Izuku agreed and addressed Nezu as teacher. Nezu remained on the large rock, produced a small tablet suited to his size, and prepared to take notes about Izuku's quirk. Nezu asked Izuku to explain any limits he had discovered. Izuku identified fire as a clear weakness and observed that no quirk was truly all-powerful, even top heroes had limits. Nezu typed the point into his tablet. Izuku added that his glowing eyes, which activated whenever he used his quirk, prevented stealthy use and would immediately reveal him. Nezu suggested support gear for Izuku's hero uniform, such as glasses or goggles designed to contain the light from his eyes without obstructing his vision, mentioning that one of his teachers used a similar solution. Izuku agreed to update his sketches. He admitted he preferred writing over drawing but enjoyed sketching ideas for hero costumes and had many concepts he wanted to refine. Nezu then requested a small demonstration. Izuku consented. His eyes glowed green to indicate the quirk was active, and plants sprang to life around him. 2 young maple trees grew on either side, vines wrapped around their trunks, and roses bloomed along the vines. Nezu, taking notes, praised Izuku's impressive control. Izuku acknowledged that his quirk had always come naturally to him. Izuku thought that plants did what he wanted no matter what. Nezu continued taking notes and observed that Izuku had not found a limit to what he could make nature do. Izuku explained that, while quirks in general were known for defying the laws of physics and much of the universe, his went far beyond that. He had been able to use nature as a source of energy in place of electricity, create living creatures made of plants, and even see through the senses of nature itself. Nezu expressed amazement and said it was rare to encounter a quirk he had never seen before, noting that Izuku's ability was certainly unique in many ways. Izuku agreed but clarified that his quirk was not limitless. He described it as having an internal energy source. At rest it refilled from whatever energy he had recently used, and when active it slowly drained. The more advanced the uses, the more energy it consumed. Nezu took more notes on his tablet and suggested that Izuku essentially had a small stockpile for his quirk. Izuku shrugged and classified his quirk as mostly elemental in nature, comparing it to Endeavor and Kamui Woods. Nezu added the point to his notes and asked what other limits Izuku would describe. Izuku explained that he had more energy when connected to the earth, so having a direct connection to the ground allowed him to use his quirk for longer and to perform more complex, fantastical feats. Nezu hypothesized that it would be different on a boat or plane, and Izuku confirmed that while he could still use his quirk in those situations, he could not sustain it as long and it was harder to achieve the more advanced effects. Nezu found the information truly fascinating and continued jotting things down, remarking that Izuku had a very good grasp of his quirk's capabilities. Izuku revealed that he practiced a lot in private because his parents had insisted he keep the full extent of his power a secret. They had told him to maintain the appearance that his quirk only made flowers grow and bloom, which was what his teachers and classmates believed. Nezu noted the discrepancy between that secrecy and the general culture at Izuku's school, where public quirk use was extremely common. Izuku confirmed that students and teachers used their quirks every day, and added that his homeroom teacher sometimes used his quirk to extend his hand and lightly slap Izuku on the head whenever the teacher felt Izuku was not focusing on the lesson. Izuku clarified that not focusing meant any time he was not looking at the board, even if he was taking notes. He mentioned this as another example of the rampant favoritism at his school, especially since Bakugo could nap in class without reprimand. Nezu hummed and took additional notes in a separate folder. He was aware that laws restricting quirk use without proper permits were often ignored in practice, and that public quirk use was commonly tolerated as long as people could get away with it. He found the uncontrolled use of quirks by young teenagers concerning and felt that a school should be a safe place. The fact that some teachers seemed to encourage casual public quirk use troubled him. Izuku asked if Nezu wanted to know anything else, and Nezu turned off his tablet and put it away, stating that he had everything he needed for now and that the conversation had yielded more information than expected. Izuku observed that most people did not think about their quirk as much as he did. They typically accepted what their quirk doctor told them and did not experiment or investigate further. Nezu expressed interest and asked what Izuku meant. Izuku explained that quirk science and quirk doctors were still relatively new and imperfect, and that people often trusted their doctor's words as if they were complete answers. He argued that some individuals became overconfident in those diagnoses and stopped questioning them, sometimes leading to misunderstandings about the true nature of a quirk. Nezu acknowledged that quirk doctors did need to know what they were talking about and mentioned his experience consulting with them when students lost control or experienced a quirk awakening. He said that Quirk doctors provided valuable recommendations for Quirk counselors. Izuku conceded the point but reiterated that overconfidence could still lead to mistakes, and he used his mother's quirk as an example. Nezu remembered that Izuku's mother could bring small objects into her hand and noted that her quirk had originally been described as a small form of telekinesis. Izuku disagreed and said that, if it were telekinetic, she should be able to control objects fully rather than simply pull them into her hand. He explained that pulling objects toward a hand felt more like a gravitational effect, similar to how a planet's gravity drew things inward. Nezu asked how Izuku had come to that conclusion. Izuku recounted that after he suggested the idea, his mother consulted a Quirk counselor whom his father sometimes worked with for support gear evaluations. The counselor confirmed Izuku's hypothesis. His mother had a small gravitational field. She continued to visit the counselor twice a year to have her field checked, ensuring she did not inadvertently interfere with the Earth's natural gravity. Izuku noted that the quirk had always stayed the same and only worked on small objects that she wanted to bring to her. Principal Nezu replied that if it were not for Izuku's desire to be a hero, he would have recommended a career in quirk science. Izuku informed his mentor that he planned to get a license to be a quirk counselor after he became a hero. He believed every hero should have such a license, since heroes sometimes had to deal with people who had lost control of their quirks. Nezu nodded and told Izuku that he was correct. He explained that obtaining a quirk counseling license was one of his requirements when hiring teachers at UA. New hires had to either already have one or be willing to get one. Izuku appreciated Nezu's thought process. Nezu added that it was not only hero classes that faced quirk issues. Students in support, business, and general education could also struggle with their abilities. He reminded Izuku that UA was known as the top hero school in Japan, but non-hero students far outnumbered hero students, and it would be unfair to give them different resources simply because they were not pursuing hero work. Izuku said that those students would be happy to hear Nezu express that sentiment. Nezu told him he believed all his students were special in their own ways and that no one should be told otherwise simply because they did not aim for the stars. He gave examples of past students, business students who wanted to start their own companies, support students who chose to build for civilians, and general education students who had become teachers, doctors, chefs, police officers, and more. Izuku smiled and told Nezu that there was no other hero like him. There was a reason Nezu was his favorite hero. His dedication as an educator only reinforced that. Nezu reminded Izuku not to let anyone tell him he was not special, and Izuku promised he would not. Later, while copying some of Nezu's analysis for the UA principal, Izuku asked why UA only had 2 hero classes. He noted that UA was the best hero school in Japan, yet it only had Class A and Class B, and most students at UA were not hero students. Nezu set down the pen he had been using and explained that he took pride in all his students, those in the hero course, support, business, and general studies. He wanted the best education possible for everyone while maintaining high standards. UA students received a lot of attention, and Nezu would not allow any of them to believe they were the best simply because they had been admitted. Izuku tilted his head, asking what that had to do with his question. Nezu clarified that the hero course was different from the other 3. They allowed only 40 hero students each year. He told Izuku about past issues with overly confident or uninterested candidates and said that admitting more than 40 would increase the risk of taking in students who might not become good heroes. Izuku guessed that Nezu favored quality over quantity, and Nezu confirmed this. He explained that UA was known as the best, not because of the number of heroes it produced but because of the quality of its alumni. Many UA graduates had become some of the best heroes in Japan, names like All Might, Endeavor, Best Jeanist, Crust, Gang Orca, Edgeshot, and the increasingly popular Kamui Woods. Izuku pointed out that Kamui was impossible to miss, since he had been having dinner with their family the night before, and Izuku joked that Kamui might marry his mother's cooking if that were possible. Nezu continued that while it was good to have many heroes, the quality of those heroes mattered. Too many aspiring heroes were more focused on attention and sponsors than on genuine heroism. They treated heroics as a path to fame rather than a calling. Izuku agreed, saying that his dislike of humans' tendencies in that direction was understandable. He mentioned that Kamui often ranted about some of those attitudes. Nezu shook his head and noted that chasing fame had become a common reason people chose hero work over other difficult fields like acting, music, or sports. Izuku suggested that fame seekers probably saw heroics as an easier way to get noticed, and he added that a former street idol, Pop Step, had unintentionally encouraged that mindset when her popularity grew after she helped two vigilantes, Knuckleduster and the Crawler. She had her fans before, but their numbers increased greatly after she became known for helping them. Nezu sighed fondly that it had been a long time since he had thought about those three and added that a few of his teachers had fought alongside them during some of those instant villain attacks. Izuku said that his father had been lucky to avoid becoming an instant villain during the attack when a swarm of Quirk-created bees caused a bunch of random people to transform. Nezu observed that Izuku did not sound like he disapproved of how there used to be more vigilantes. Izuku shrugged and said he believed everyone deserved a chance to be a hero, if someone had the drive to help others and the determination to keep going after failing to become an official hero, then he praised those who walked the vigilante path. Nezu remarked that many humans would call him an old soul, and Izuku acknowledged that he heard that often. Nezu then told Izuku that the Crawler had tried to become an official hero and had even signed up for the entrance exam, but he had saved the life of a young girl and missed the exam. As a result, the Crawler went to a regular high school and later to college, which was where his vigilante life began. Izuku, being the quirk enthusiast he was, asked about the Crawler's quirk. Nezu explained that the Crawler's quirk was similar to the hero's slide and go. While in contact with any surface, he could glide on it as if he were a human hoverboard. At first, the Crawler could only do this on solid surfaces such as the ground or walls, but he eventually learned to use it with the air, granting him a slight flight ability. Izuku pulled out another notebook and got a thoughtful look on his face. Nezu chuckled at how Izuku always seemed to produce notebooks and was briefly tempted to ask if the boy had a secret quirk that allowed him to do that. He recognized the familiar expression of someone piecing together a puzzle. Nezu murmured that seeing Izuku at work showed him what it must be like when people looked at him. Izuku flipped through a few pages and crossed out some things while adding others. He announced that the entrance exam involved fighting robots. Nezu asked what led him to that conclusion. Izuku explained that the details Nezu had given about the Crawler and the analyses Izuku had made of certain students fit together. He also noted that when he had examined the quirks of the expelled class, most were combat or stealth-oriented, with only a couple of unique exceptions, and none had mental quirks. Izuku reasoned that combat quirks were ideally suited to fight robots, and strong elemental or physical users would easily handle them. Stealth quirks could exploit robots' weaknesses or find off switches, while those with unique quirks would need creativity or martial training to compensate. Mental quirks, however, did not affect technology and therefore placed those users at a disadvantage during the entrance exam. Nezu praised Izuku for demonstrating the kind of insight that made him a perfect protege. Izuku continued flipping through his journal, not noticing that he had been muttering much of his analysis. Nezu, however, was one of the few who could keep up with him when he began to mutter. Izuku pointed out that many students with quirks suited for hero work still never made it into the hero course despite taking the entrance exam. Nezu asked for examples. Izuku read from his notes about Meilin Osaka. He said she had taken the entrance exam for the hero course 2 years ago but appeared in the business course on the file Nezu had given him. Her quirk, Mist, allowed her to turn her body into any gas whose chemical structure she knew, while retaining control to keep some parts of her body solid if she wished. Nezu remembered Meilin's remarkable control. She had even scored points by tricking robots into colliding with one another by luring them and then turning into gas at the last second, but she still had not scored enough to enter the hero course. Izuku suggested that her quirk would be perfect for a stealth hero. She could become invisible gases to observe villains or use incapacitating gases to neutralize threats before they could react. Izuku noted in his journal that because her quirk did not work on robots, she had to go into a different course. Nezu made a thoughtful hum as he listened to his protege. Izuku flipped to the next page and read the entry on Makoto Mitsusama. He recorded that Makoto was a second-year student in the support course and that his quirk, Hive Mind, was a telepathic ability similar to Mandalay's. Izuku explained that Mandalay could only project her own thoughts to others, while Makoto's quirk could create telepathic links between people for up to an hour, allowing them to communicate silently with one another. Nezu nodded and observed that Makoto was another useful example, adding that the student had attempted the entrance exam for the hero course but had not managed to score any points. Izuku turned another page and read about Rin Suzuki. He described Rin as a third-year general studies student with a quirk called Image Weaver, an illusion ability that functioned like painting or drawing. Izuku noted how valuable such a quirk could be for a hero, since Rin could paint illusions over people to hide them or disguise them as someone else for infiltration. Nezu complimented Izuku on the thought he had put into the profiles. Izuku closed his notebook and gave his mentor a serious look. He explained to Nezu that he did not usually speak like this to a teacher, but felt compelled to say the entrance exam was broken. He argued that apart from a few students who managed to get in despite robotic enemies, the exam focused almost entirely on combat-related quirks. He emphasized that heroes did not need only combat abilities to be effective. Nezu reminded him that UA still had some of the best heroes in Japan among its alumni. Izuku countered that the system could produce even more great heroes if the entrance exam broadened its scope to include a wider variety of quirks. He pointed to the 3 students he had described as examples of capable candidates who were effectively excluded by the exam, and he listed heroes and sidekicks with non-combat quirks: Mandalay, Ragdoll, Sir Night Eye, Power Loader, Rocklock, Midnight, Sirius, Bubble Girl as proof that non-combat abilities could be valuable in hero work. Nezu sighed and regarded his student with a mix of patience and understanding. He recognized that Izuku's critique came from a place of genuine care rather than cynicism. Izuku had seen the darker side of quirk discrimination, but he remained a kind young man determined to improve hero society. Nezu admitted that he had tried to change the entrance exam several times. He confessed that, even as principal, his authority was limited. Any change required approval from the Hero Commission and the UA Board of Directors, and his proposals had not succeeded. Izuku thought for a few moments, then proposed a pragmatic approach. He suggested starting small by increasing the number of hero students per class, adding only a few additional students initially and gradually expanding until a third class could be justified. He argued that more spots would create more opportunities for students with non-combat quirks to enter the hero course. Nezu agreed with the logic and added another idea. He proposed that teachers be given a role similar to hero recommendations. Teachers could select promising students who had failed the entrance exam or identify candidates before the exam and serve as their mentors, providing an alternate route into hero training. He believed this would open opportunities for those who could not enter through the standard process. Before they could continue, a knock came at Nezu's door. Nezu called for the visitor to enter. Present Mike stepped into the office, and Izuku's fanboy excitement surfaced despite himself. Mike greeted them in his usual dramatic radio style and announced that he was dropping off his latest reports, including complaints from listeners upset about being placed in general studies after failing to score enough points for the hero course. Nezu's smile grew mischievous as he credited Izuku for a possible solution. He told Mike that there might be fewer of those complaints in the future thanks to the initiative they had just discussed. Izuku felt his cheeks redden as Nezu gestured toward him, embarrassed by the praise from one hero to another. Present Mike raised an eyebrow and felt a shiver of anticipation at Nezu's expression. Nezu affirmed the plan with a grin that made Present Mike take notice. He came up with a brilliant idea that would eventually become one giant insult to the Hero Commission and Board of Directors for their refusal to change the entrance exam. Izuku grinned and offered his help to Nezu. Present Mike stammered that they should continue and that he needed to pick up some papers from the teacher's lounge. Present Mike left faster than even Ingenium could run. By the time he reached the teacher's lounge, he looked as if he might be sick or as if he were preparing to lock himself away. Midnight noticed him first and raised an eyebrow, asking why he looked like he'd seen a ghost and clarifying that she meant an actual ghost, not a student with a ghost quirk. Present Mike declared that they needed to find a way to live on the moon and instructed Power Loader to build a rocket immediately. Power Loader asked why he needed to do that, sharing Midnight's confusion. Present Mike explained that there were 2 of him and that Nezu had somehow found a miniature version.